Taylor, thank you for taking the time to join me and have a conversation. You know, we talked briefly before we hit the record button, and the the aspect of our environment is so crucial, and we find ourselves living a indoor lifestyle now, right? 2026, we're always inside. This is why we can tie into this whole architecture uh, conversation that you're going to bring, right? You're going to bring that expertise in a really unique and beautiful way where I have gone from thinking that nutrition was the paramount aspect of health. I no longer believe that. And I think that we need to pay attention to how we live, right? We don't think about a lot of these things that are actually much more correlated to the disease epidemics that we have, mental state, on and on. So, with that, can you give us a little bit of that introduction to who you are? And then we're just going to start just diving into some things I don't think a lot of people are thinking.
Well, yeah, Logan, great. Thanks very much for having me as a guest on your podcast. I really admire and appreciate the work you do. I love the authentic and relevant and qualified conversations that you're having with people. I can tell that you're operating from a place of service and love and compassion for people, and it's beautiful to see that, and I'm honored to be on your show today. So thank you for having me. It's true. We are spending, the average person is spending more than half their lives in their home, you know, and our environment really plays a factor on us. Winston Churchill said, "We shape our buildings, and thereafter they shape us." And so, you know, we wanna make sure that we're shaping them in a way that's supportive. I think anyone who's done a little bit of research or self-awareness practice of any kind understands there's a definite mind-body connection. And, I mean, even medicine says placebo effect, that's mind-body connection, right? That's proof of it right there, but it shows up in so many different ways. As an architect, my job is to help people understand the mind body environment connection so that they can put the environment to work for them, and so it can help them, and encourage them, and rather than become a friction point or obstacle or a challenge that they have to overcome to reach their goals, it actually creates flow and gives them a little lift into their success. So that's what conscious home design is about.
I love it. We think about, like even just like a bedroom, we're spending, 7, 8, 9, 10 hours in, a
Yeah,
singular room, right? And we hardly think
yeah.
about it. And so, Taylor, I want to circle back just a little bit. I don't want to get too deep into it just yet, but like I being faced with, the cancer diagnosis of my son, the fact that, cancer is such a massive part of what we do. I work with who I believe is like, one of the greatest naturopath oncologists in the world, Dr. Petra Gavlar. And so like we're seeing all of these things play out, and the environment is such a big focus for us. Right. It is such a massive focus for us. The modalities, the different things that we have to do within protocols, or she does, uh, is very, very important, but this may be more important it for so many reasons, right? And so, I'm gonna throw this back to you, but I believe now that the light environment we are in is massively destroying us, right? We hide from the sun. We think the sun causes cancer. It causes all these things, that it's a problem. We don't pay attention to what LED lights are doing, flicker, polarized lights, the lack of incandescence, no infrared, right? We don't look at like maybe dirty electricity is actually a thing, right? EMFs may actually have an impact on our biology. MS seems to disappear at the equator, but as we go more away, towards the poles, it increases, right? Neurodegenerative diseases, seasonal affective disorder pop up in the winter, right? And so, like, we have a lot of these conversations around light, but we don't, or environment and light, and don't realize it, right? Like, that is the elephant in the room, so to speak. So, with that, what I have found is like when we get bedrooms dark, we embrace a sunrise, that infrared blast that sets God's timing, the circadian rhythm. A lot of these things happen. But Taylor, what we have done is we don't experience time changes, right? with the lighting of our house. It's always bright. Our bathrooms are lit up like LEDs. Our refrigerator, if you open it up in the middle of the night, you're getting blasted. There's no light that's natural. It's all artificial. There's no temperature that's natural. It's all artificial. So from an architect, right? From the standpoint of energy efficiency and all the other stuff that they try to shove in that destroys everything that I'm talking about, how do you view that environment? How do you view the solutions that you're seeing that have made a positive impact on people's lives? And how can we start just implementing little things from your perspective?
There's a lot to unpack there, Logan. This is a very rich, deep conversation and very broad, very encompassing. Um, I'm reminded of scientific first principles. And I go over this in the book a little bit. It's one of the core principles of it's one of the cornerstones of conscious home design. Which is basically average healthy in their prime human being can potentially go 7 weeks without food, 7 days without water, 7 minutes without air, and that really um, if we think about that, which we typically don't, even though we all say, oh yeah, obvious, I know you can't live more than 7 minutes without air, but people don't we don't build that way. Indoor air quality is typically less quality than the outside air. And yet air is the number one thing that we need to survive. And so when we're spending multiple hours a day, in our home or in the bedroom, having well oxygenated air, think about when you go to the ocean, and it's at sea level, it's the most oxygen rich and dense environment, that pretty much on the planet. And you just take a deep breath and just feel so recharged. Yeah. Or even like on a mountaintop where maybe the air is thinner and there's less oxygen, but still it's so fresh and it's full of, the ultraviolet rays from the sun and it's purified air. And you just feel so invigorated breathing that outside air. I don't I can't remember taking a deep breath inside of any building I've ever been in and felt invigorated or revitalized. You know what I mean? It's just not it doesn't happen. So, you know, one of the things I look for is particularly in bedrooms to say, what can we do to introduce fresh air, outside air that's been oxygenated and purified by the ultraviolet rays of the sun? We get ultraviolet rays through our windows in our homes, but they're only the lower spectrum rays. That's why the fabrics will fade. That they'll fade because the low spectrum ultraviolets are bleaching out the fabric. But you can't get a sunburn on your skin through the window because the glass is filtering out the upper spectrum ultraviolets, and those are the purifying rays. So there is a filtration effect that's happening through our windows. So even though you're getting light, you're not getting the full spectrum of the sun. And that's, on one hand, it's a good thing, because you don't want too much direct sun exposure on the skin because, it burns. But it's also a bad thing because we're missing some of the purification qualities of the sun's rays. So just, looking for ways to introduce air. And that can be done through an HRV, ERV. It's a heat recovery ventilator or an energy recovery ventilator, which is basically a series of pipes, a sleeve that vents inside air out without coming into direct contact with the outside air coming in, but it preheats or pre-cools the outside air coming in so that you're introducing outside air into the house that's filtered so it doesn't have dust and pollens and things in it, but it's being pre-warmed or pre-cooled depending on if it's summer or winter time with the outgoing air. So you're not wasting energy. It's conservative on your utility bills, but you're still bringing in fresh air into the home. And so this is if it's within your budget, definitely do that. On the other hand, the sort of old school way is just crack a window, keep a, keep a window open, that could be difficult if you're living in an urban environment where it's very noisy and there's a lot of pollution. Um, but you just have to do the best you can with where you are. In a case like that, I'm looking into some high quality air filtration to help. So that's for scientific first principles. Touching on that, um, the other comment I wanted to share was, well, why don't you touch back on something else that you were um,
Yeah, well,
mentioning
I wanna circle
before?
back on a little bit of the optics, there. So Alexander Runch has put out a brilliant work around, how what you're saying about the light spectrums, right? And so there is a meme that goes through talking about how there's an Australian truck driver on one side of his face where, the sun always is. It's all wrinkled and dark. It's aged, like, significantly, and the other side's not. It may be, I don't know, let's say a 70-year-old man. But what, Wunsch has laid out there is exactly what you said, is like UVA actually is able to come through. We block UVB, we alter infrared significantly, whereas quartz allows the full spectrum to pass through, whereas glass doesn't,
Yes,
right? This is a very
quartz glass. Yep,
important connotation with that. Then I think back to you saying air quality. James Nestor wrote the incredible book, one of my favorite books. His work is one of my favorite, Breathe, right? And he went into all of these extremely energy efficient hotels and things that are like, the 5-star Lear or whatever it is. And the air quality is atrocious, right? CO2 is extremely high, right? And I'm not saying it's necessarily a CO2 is bad. I'm just saying, like, in the connotation of Park Million, it is an issue. So I stay in hotels too much, but I go and I open the window first thing. Like, to your point, I can't control so many things about there, but I can at least get fresh air in. I think even high density pollution air is better than what we're recirculating in those
sure,
really tight buildings. But
that's right.
uh, the the light topic, what windows are doing, Taylor, is essentially creating an artificial light, right? We've altered the optics in the spectrum completely to where it's basically another blue light that we're exposed to, even with glass. And I think that's a really important distinction. So, have you looked much into like quartz? As when it's expensive, right? Like, that's
I sure
crazy
have.
expensive.
Yeah.
But what are your thoughts around that conversation?
So yeah, quartz glass. I know that an experiment was done with a small little greenhouse like chicken coop, and they put the chickens in these two different, regular glass versus quartz glass, and within 30 days, the chickens under regular glass had all sorts of diseases and mange and molds and things growing on their feathers and everything, and they were in extremely poor health, and the ones under the quartz glass were just fine, just regular chickens. It was like they were living outside. As an architect, and I heard about the quartz glass, back when I was in college, not through my college studies, because the architecture curriculum doesn't talk about this, but this is my own interests in personal health and human excellence, led me to, personal improvement and development led me to study things outside of traditional architecture curriculum, which is how I came across the quartz glass study. But as I looked to find quartz glass solutions that were practical, because right now quartz glass is for labs. It's test tubes and little pieces of window for for light, that they're doing for science experiments, or tiny little pieces of it that are like $100 for like a 6x6 square. Getting quartz glass made into windows for the home, of size and of strength. I haven't found it. I haven't found a way to practically actually do that. And it would be amazing if we did, but it would also, um, you know, it we would have to change the way we design because again, people aren't used to getting a sunburn sitting in front of their thing. So if you're sitting on the couch, for 3 hours and you're in front of a quartz glass window, next thing you know, you're a lobster. you know, Not good, right? So it needs, such a technology change would require extremely prudent and sensitive placement, to be well. Like perhaps there could be a bank of windows, but one or two, or could be quartz glass, just to introduce some some light there. This is the ideal. This is I certainly wish quartz glass was readily available for the home. It isn't. If you find it, Logan, send it my way for sure.
Well,
Yeah, Corning Glass, they're in New York, they're just a few hundred miles from me. I had a long conversation with them, with one of their engineers, talking about glass and properties and stuff, and it's just not something that they have. The market hasn't demanded it. The cost to produce it hasn't, according to their math, they're like, well, it's we're not going to develop this and then go try to sell it to people, because people aren't going to, the value proposition isn't there.
fair. Yeah.
Average person's not going to pay the 10x premium to have that for their home. So the other thing that I wanted to touch on from your first comment, I just didn't want to segue without touching back with you. I mentioned the scientific first principles, but the truth is, we didn't, our bodies didn't adapt and adjust and grow inside of buildings. We evolved in nature, right? Like, nature is our habitat. So the body responds. Studies been done. You can, the most beautiful architecture, the most beautifully decorated room, you can show 1,000 people that that a picture of that room, and everyone might agree, or nearly everyone would say, yes, that's a beautiful room, whether it's their personal taste or not. You may say, yes, it's not my cup of tea, but I can see it's very beautiful. It's not the style that I want to live in, but it's very well designed. Everyone can agree on that. But not everyone will have the same physiological response to seeing that room. Some people, it might make them excited. Some people they might feel indifferent. Others might be like, yeah, not really. People are gonna have different responses. Um, what we know is that when you show people a landscape, greenscape, some mountains or some trees, or a meadow, or even a beach with the ocean, that the the mind tends to calm. The alpha waves, will calm a little bit, and our breath, instead of, it's normally fairly shallow, it will start deepening. It'll take slightly deeper breaths, and the heart rate, will achieve a resting heart rate more quickly and easily, and that can lead to blood pressure drops, and certainly stress levels being reduced. And this is universal. You can show 1,000 people a greenscape, and they're all going to have that physiological response. But they're not going to have that physiological response looking at architecture, and it's because the body is being signaled by the environment, hey, you're in your natural environment, it's safe, and so you can relax and take a deep breath, and it ties into the parasympathetic nervous system. And so I'm always supporting people in their efforts to bring plants into the home, because just seeing that sends signals, sends cues to you, subconsciously, instinctually, you're safe, you're in your element, and so that's going to help people to stay a little bit calmer. And we know, medically, that stress, shortens life expectancy, right? And so the more calm we can be, and one of the ways in our unnatural environment, no matter how beautiful your home is, it's still, the fact of the matter is, it's unnatural. So one of the things that we can do, one of the biggest things we can do, the easiest low-hanging fruit, right? Doesn't take much effort at all. Get some plants. The more, the better. Fill your space full of plants. That will send cues to your body, and start to counteract some of the things that we really can't. There's nothing we can do about the windows. We can maybe buy some incandescent light bulbs. I do. You're not allowed to in California, but in other states, you can. And so I typically will use, personally, I spend more time outside I'm in Vermont. So, winter is long and cold, summer is beautiful and sunny, and it's the cooling season. So I usually swap my bulbs out. In the summertime, I'm going to be using LEDs for energy efficiency, but in the wintertime, I swap out the incandescents because they produce a little bit of heat. I want the heat, because it's already the heating season. Plus, I'm spending less time outside, and I'm not getting as much of the red spectrum. So I change my bulbs seasonally, actually, where it's possible, like my desk lamp here, for example.
I love that you brought in the, I don't know, without directly saying it, color, right? Bringing in the color of green, of landscapes, of natural,
Yeah,
right? And it bringing in plants, that's huge. And you talked a little bit earlier about, air filtration. The NASA did a study, I don't know, 60 years ago, talking about how plants were like the best filter for the space station, right? And I think, snake plant or mother-in-law's plant is like the best, right? At purifying the air and providing oxygen. And it's CAM photosynthesis, which I think is super interesting, that tangent. But, um, also, I'm hopefully by the time we're done talking, you're not gonna switch out light bulbs again, right? Like, so the LEDs are a huge problem, right? Like, the whole aspect of polarized light versus unpolarized is huge. Flicker, massive. The light spectrum where it's high peaks, horrible. So, like, what I'll do is, number one, I think the Light Doctor, Dr. Edie, incredible book. His work has been absolutely paramount. He's working with a lot of architects on like hospitals and office buildings and things. But uh, you that spectrum and the lighting is, Taylor. It's such a big conversation. And as we started, I thought nutrition was paramount. Like this, that's actually where it starts. That opening the window and changing out the light bulbs, or just turning them stinking things off, huge, huge, right? So, I say all that to kind of circle back. There are so many things that we experience that we don't pay any attention to, right? Air
that's right.
quality is not way up there. The light's not up there. The life, being around life or not around life. So go into a little bit about what you hope we will accomplish by having an architecture or a, what are they called? Biologic builder or biological engineer. There's a lot of different, things coming together. Um, and even, I've got a buddy, Ben Falk is up there in Vermont by you. He's a permaculture guy, and he is big into permaculture design. So I think that's a whole nother conversation to this too. How do you see all of that merging together, and then the future of these kind of next steps?
You're absolutely right that people don't understand, and don't even notice, the environmental factors that are impacting them. The environment does affect us, 24/7, whether we're aware of it or not. Seth Godin said it takes 10,000 hours, to get expert level, knowledge in something. That's average. Obviously, rocket science, maybe a little bit more, being an accountant, maybe a little bit less, just the complexities aren't the same. But just sort of a rule of thumb average, 10,000 hours. Most people are not spending 10,000 hours studying their environment. It's not their calling in life. For me, that is my dharma. That's my path is architecture. And so this is why we consult and hire experts, because they help us shortcut our success. You know, it's like, hey, if I want to optimize my body, I work with a personal trainer because in 6 months' time, I'm going to make more progress than I would by myself in 3 years. Right. So it's definitely, you definitely want to consult with all the experts, you can to keep your success moving forward. That said, it's not, you don't want to be obsessive about things, especially things that you have no control over, like the quartz glass. It's like there's obviously quartz glass is going to bring benefits that regular glass does not, but regular glass is still better than no glass at all. Right? So the word window, comes from the Old Norse word for windaga, which means wind eye. back before glass even was invented, they knew that, hey, you got to put a hole in your home, in your building, so that air can come in, so that everyone doesn't die from stagnation.
Yeah.
Right? So the very word window actually refers to wind, not light. But going back to air, air quality. So, but here's what's true. The University of Madrid found that they did a study at their hospital. They had a mental health ward for people suffering from manic depression, and the just the way that the hospital was built, this is just accidental, okay? But there was the wing was north south, and there's central corridor. So there's rooms on the east side, rooms on the west side, uh, you know, and people that were suffering from manic depression occupied those rooms. All the rooms are the same location, same size, same healthcare, same staff, but the people on the east wings got out on average 3 days sooner. They recovered 3 days faster than the people on the west wings. What's the difference? Morning sun versus afternoon sun. They're still being filtered by the exact same windows. It's just the time of day. It's circadian, right? And so light, absolutely, even with our imperfect windows, affects our health measurably. You talked, initially in the very first, introduction, your first talk, you talked about the rhythms of nature and the cycles of life, and being connected to the earth. Again, tying back to what's our natural habitat, what feels good for us. And so sensitive placement, even of imperfect windows, can really make a difference and move the needle in terms of our overall sense of connection, our sense of being, I'm okay, I'm connected to life. I'm so I really, we're talking about in my book. Incidentally, I do mention the NASA study in conscious home design, and if you go to my website conscioushomedesign.com, I have a pop-up that comes up, and you can enter your name and email address and get it's an infographic that I created of the 5 best plants for indoor air quality based on that study. And I actually put a few bonus plants in there, ones that are pet safe, so if you have animals that are always munching on the plants, then you want to have plants that are gonna, that are gonna be
Mm.
safe for critters. Um, anyway, plants is fine, but the sunny window effect is something else that I touch on in my book, and it's a term that I coined, sunny window effect. But I noticed, even when I was a kid, um, that I'd be hanging out in a room, and whether I was reading a book or doing some homework or playing, toys on the floor or whatever, um, you know, the sun came in and would fill the room, and the pets, whether it was the dog or the cat, they would always curl up in that sunny patch, and a cloud may come by and suddenly the room gets dim and dark, and then the cloud rolls by and the room illuminates again. And I found that even the most beautifully decorated room, that's very inviting, when the sun is shining into that room, it's that much extra. It's that much more welcoming. We really want to go in there. Light is life. We're attracted to it instinctually, and so are the animals. We can just take our cue from that. But if you're sensitive and you pay attention and take a moment, you'll find that you are too. That we just, oh yeah, we want to go to a sunny room. Unless we're trying to do something on a screen and we need contrast or something, but for all other intents. So one of the things that I like to do is put the kitchen in the southeast corner of the home, if possible. If I have a chance to build a brand new home for someone, because grandma always said that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. And if your kitchen is in the northwest, and it's dark in corner, then it's just not as welcoming. And if you're pressed for time in the morning, you're just going to be like, okay, coffee and a granola bar, and you're out the door. And that's fine when you're young, or fine for a while, but over years of that, your nutrition levels are going to suffer, right? And so if we can create a bright, welcoming, sunny kitchen, then it's gonna encourage you or invite you to stay for an extra 5 or 10 minutes and actually prepare something a little bit more robust for you to for your meals. And so that's a way that it can support us. We can build our natural inclination to follow the cycles of the sun into our homes in ways that just even without you paying attention to it, it's going to help you live in balance, in rhythm with things. I don't want people to be obsessing about things they can't control. If your kitchen is not in the southeast, and you don't have the ability to hire me or another architect to build yourself a new home, like don't worry about stuff that you can't control. Like you need to focus on things that are within your capacity, which is why I like the plants, because anyone can do that. There's something else though that's super, super impactful. Okay. That anyone can do no matter where they are. And it's worth camping out here for a moment to talk about this. So when I wrote Conscious Home Design, I was not I know, it's very clear, the architects, the knowledge, and I spent tens of thousands of hours, not just 10,000 hours, it was decades. I was 20 years in the industry, in the business before I published my book, right? So, um, that's like 40,000 hours or something, right? And so it took me, a lot of experience and trial and error and practice and research to be able to come up with the book. I didn't want to write a 40 chapter book with everything I know because it's overwhelming. No one's going to read that. How can I boil it down to these are the essentials, the biggest, there's that analogy where if you got to put the rocks in the jar before you put the pebbles, because if you put the pebbles in, then there's no room for the big things that matter. And so I boiled it down of all the things that I could find in the world that impacted human happiness and excellence through the influence of architecture. I put the rocks in. Conscious Home Design is a book full of architectural rocks. There is some small stuff added in for flavor and to mix it up, but I made sure to put the rocks in first. Yeah. And so I was very clear I didn't want to write a book about style, or aesthetic. It's like I like red, I like green. Well, it doesn't, that matters, but we're not going to talk. We assume you're going to get the style you want when you hire an architect. Of course, you're going to get, whether it's modern or traditional or something in between or rustic, whatever you want, you're going to get that. That's the easy part. But getting the style you want isn't going to make your life better if the space doesn't actually flow for what you need to do. So in my research for the book, I came across the Harvard study of adult happiness. And so this was uh, a study, in fact, it's still going on to this day. It's the oldest and largest of its kind in the world. It started in 1938. So here we are 88 years later. They've studied thousands of individuals and they basically did a big intake. Okay, who are you? What's your outlook, on life? What are your goals? What's your mental health? What's your physical health? What's your background? Do you come from prosperity and opportunity, or do you come from poverty and strife and difficulty? And so they looked at their history, where they are now, and where they were going into the future, and then they tracked these individuals for their whole lives. And periodically they'd get them back and they'd update their status. Okay, how are things looking now? And so all the original people have passed on now after 88 years, and they're on to subsequent generations, second, third generations. But what they have found with everyone, what the big data says, is that everyone has challenges in life. Whether they're career changes or health challenges or business success or failure. Whether they had money and were able to have a big fancy house, or whether they didn't and they even lived in a very modest home, some of them even with no running water. They found that all of these things matter, but the single biggest thing, the thing that moved the needle the most, in terms of not only people's happiness and them reporting that they felt satisfied and a fulfilled life, but also longevity. Their very life expectancy was um, impacted the most profoundly by the quality of their relationships. And so when I came across that data point, and this makes sense, right? We all say, "Oh, everything I do is for my family." It's why I get out of bed in the morning to make the lives of the people I care about better, right? So, and or my friends, in my spare time, I want to hang out with my friends, right? Friends and family, the connections we have, that's what makes life worthwhile, right? We all know this intuitively. We understand that, but without the math proving it to us that it actually statistically is going to help you live longer, it stays on as a wish. It stays on your wish list. It's an item for our wish list. And it's, oh, I wish I had more time for this. I wish I had more time for my family, or this or that other thing, but I really should do this responsible thing here or whatever. Once we know the math behind it and it's proven to us scientifically, it justifies us and gives us permission to move it off of our wish list and put that item on our must have list. It justifies us prioritizing it. So as an architect, my job is, the highest calling of architecture is to help people live happily ever after. It's to help people live their best life. That's the purpose of architecture, right? Allow to facilitate human prosperity and possibility. And so if I know that quality connections are the single biggest predictor of our happiness, our satisfaction, and our health and our life expectancy. Look, architecture's not medicine. It's the in every individual is an individual, and you can have the best home with the best quartz glass and all these things, and you may still have a short life. But if you have quality connections, then that you're doing the very best you can to increase your chances of giving me a reason to live. And also the precious time that you do have, even if it's cut short, is filled up with something meaningful, right? And so your best life is going to be supported by quality relationships. So when I looked at this, I said, okay, what can I do to make sure that we're building intentionally opportunities for connection into our home, bake it into the bones? Because right now the average house is like, okay, you need a bedroom, a bathroom, a kitchen, and a hangout space. That's the basic program of a home. And that's primarily shelter. It's taking care of your physical needs, but I'm not just an animal. You can give me food and shelter and I'll survive, but I won't necessarily thrive under those conditions, right? The things that make us thrive are our higher needs, according to Maslow, Abraham Maslow, the hierarchy of human needs pyramid. Sure, we have our physical needs, our basic needs for security, and stability. But we also need personal development. We need to feel a loving love and belonging and connections. We need to have creative expression opportunities. Things to do something uniquely us. That whether it's a hobby just for ourselves or whether it's something that we do to share with other people, like bake a cake or cupcakes to share or sell or whatever. Whatever your thing is, however creativity shows up for you, that's something that people need to have a rich life. Yeah. But going back to the relationships, the Harvard study was very clear that relationships was not limited to a romantic partnership. It's, so if you're single, you can still live a long, productive, happy, full life. Um, but I wanted to find out what this, what relationship, what that word actually encompasses. And so I found out that the Greeks have 7 different words for love based on the type of relationship that it shows up in, whether it's between parent and child or two best friends, or if it's between a person in their community, or if it's between lovers. And so they have all these different words like agape and storge and eros and filial, et cetera, for all these different flavors of love. That's interesting, but I wanted to know more, so I kept diving through to really, get my arms around the subject of relationships. What does that mean? What I found is that all of the diverse relationships that we have between ourselves and everything out there are going to fall into one of 3 broad categories. And those are, I classified those as giving, receiving, and reciprocal. And so I said to myself, okay, these are 3 categories of relationship. What would a home look like if we intentionally, tried to cultivate space or shape space or provide opportunity to have all 3 kinds: giving, receiving, and reciprocal relationships. So, what does that look like? But first, before we talk about that, um, I can define, more clearly, specifically giving, receiving, and reciprocal, examples of those, if you like. I want to
Yeah, do
pause. I've
that.
been talking and
Yeah,
give you
no,
a
do that.
chance. Okay, sure. So, examples of giving relationships, right? Those are ones where we show. So, first, the qualifier is all relationships have an energetic exchange, right? There's no such thing as a purely one-sided relationship. But to classify them, I label it based on the initial, sort of at face value, what the relationship is. And so giving relationships are ones where we show up as the primary giver. And those could be ones where, with people that we are coaching or mentoring, they could be with children that we're parenting, raising, or even just teaching and babysitting. And that even extends to plants and animals, things that we nurture and care give for, right? Whether they're your pets or a bird feeder outside, that's a giving relationship that you've initiated. And that has, meaning and value for the people that choose that. And so reciprocal relationships are ones like you and I are having right now, Logan. There's where two people show up, they stand on their own 2 feet, and there's a give and take, and there's an exchange of knowledge or just hanging out in conversation. It's different, I don't have my role model face on like I would with a child, where I have to be on best behavior and sort of exemplify a certain thing that they can emulate. I can let my hair down and we could be a little bit more casual, and I can just speak from the heart. There's a different flavor to a reciprocal relationship. And so these are ones that we have with our friends, with our peers, with colleagues, with our partners and significant others. So, that kind of relationship is very healthy for us to have because it allows us to be a little bit more authentically ourselves. As opposed to the giving relationship is very powerful for us because while we may not be authentically ourselves and, hey, just be yourself. We're not necessarily being ourselves. We're sharing knowledge or care with someone, but it gets us out of ourselves. It expands our sense of self. I'm not just living in a bubble all by myself. There's other people around me that I can enrich and connect with. And that expands our personality in a different way. And then we have our receiving relationships, those where we are the beneficiary of someone else's care and love and wisdom. And so relationships that we have with our mentors and coaches and teachers, with our parents and elders and ancestors, even with our heroes or spiritual figures, where we're receiving wisdom or encouragement or love, right? So any relationship where we are inspired to be our best self or stretch into our potential a little bit, that keep doors of possibility open for us. Throughout life, we're going to experience different ratios and proportions of these relationships, of these relationship types. If you're in college, you're going to be getting a lot of professors, a lot of receiving relationships. And in your spare time, you're going to be hanging out with your buds, so a lot of reciprocal relationships, not a lot of giving relationships at that age, at that time frame for most people. But soon after, most people actually settle down and start a family. And then if you've got young kids, it's giving, 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 giving 24/7 for years, and people are going, oh, I wish I just had an hour to go hang out with my friends and have adult conversation, and have good quality reciprocal time, right? And so there's an ebb and flow in terms of, and everyone, but what we know is that throughout the course of your life, you want to have a healthy balance because that's going to develop you as a person more well-rounded, instead of being lopsided. If you're just always giving all the time and not receiving or not having reciprocal, then you become unbalanced. That's not sustainable. Conversely, if you're always receiving all the time, that's not sustainable either. You want to be, finding opportunities for reciprocal and giving. Now, these are assuming healthy people. If you're sick, then you're going to be receiving a lot, and that's okay. And in a sense, that can be a gift for someone else. I mean, I'm talking about normal, healthy people. With these balances, everyone is going to need whatever your status, current, whatever your position in life, whatever your health, physically or mentally, whoever you are as an individual, you need to do what's appropriate for you. I'm not holding a standard and saying everyone needs to meet this level. It's not, this isn't a law. This is conscious home design meets you where you are, wherever you are, and helps you just create the next best version of yourself, whatever that looks like for you. So over the course of your life, strive to find a good balance of all three kinds of relationship, whatever that means for you, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, or what the circumstances of your life are. And so um, that's a big idea, right? And it makes sense. But what does that actually look like? How can we translate that into tangible things that you can do in the home? Practical action steps that everyone is where the rubber meets the road. And so I can get into some examples. Hey, what does building for relationship success actually look like in the home?
Oh, yeah, yeah, let's do that. So, one thing that pops up is, in talking to a lot of, especially, cancer-focused physicians, is that there is a good feeling, it's not 100% by any means, but on who's going to have a better outcome based on their mentality, their attitude towards the situation, right? And a huge factor on that mentality is the support system, right? The support system is
Yeah,
relationships, and so I think
yeah,
as you're going through that, how important, that really is, of knowing, somebody has your back or you're doing it. And within relationships, one way I kind of look at them is almost like batteries. Like we all have this shared battery that's between us. It gets drained, it gets charged, or a bank account is probably another good analogy.
nice.
There's withdrawals and there's deposits. So there's a lot that goes into that. So with that said, how do you view architecture as having a positive impact within relationships?
Yeah. So I asked myself the question, for me to be able to measure and create a system of, because once you measure something, you can then qualify it and say, is that enough? Once you've categorized things, you can now start to work with them. It's contained, and you can create a methodology and a system. And so for me, for my purposes, categorizing into giving, receiving, and reciprocal relationships allows me to then evaluate the environment for opportunities for those kinds. And so I said to myself, not just relationships in general. What does architecture look like if it facilitates relationships? But what are we, let's break it down and say, is it possible to create intentional opportunities, not just for this broad idea of relationships, but giving relationships, receiving relationships, reciprocal relationships? What would it look like if every home had opportunity for all three, intentionally built in? And so then I took it one step further. I said, is it possible? And if so, what would it look like to have opportunities for all three kinds of relationship in every room of the home? You know, what now we're really talking, now we're cooking with gas. And so I like to use as an example a room that people typically do not consider a relationship supporting space, and that is the bathroom. The bathroom is really a private space. It's where you go to take care of the body. It's a personal space. It's go and do your business. Um, or if you need a break, if you're at a party and there's too much buzz going on, you just need to take a deep breath. You can take a time out in the bathroom and catch, and recenter before you go back into the fun, right?
And if you have kids,
So
it's a great place for fights, right? A really good place for the kids to get into it of, "He's in here, she's doing this, that's time." Anyway.
oh my goodness. Right. Sure. Absolutely. So that's a flow challenge. That's a size appropriate space. Spaces need to be size appropriate for the occupant load that they need to support. So that's an architect's problem. It's not the kid's fault. That's a structural issue. And as an architect, I try to look at what is going to be size appropriate and what sort of capacity do we need to support. So yeah, there's a lot of friction points. The bathrooms and the entry area of the home are two of the highest inherently friction oriented places because they're typically small and they're high transition, and there's lots of paraphernalia, boots and coats and jackets and keys and bags and phones and all sorts of things have to be unloaded in a very small area by multiple people. It's inherently a lot of clutter. It's a transition between the outside and unsafe and the sort of the profane, to the inside, the safe sanctuary, tranquil place, And so there's an energetic transition, but there's also a physical transition that happens. And so if the space is not large enough or not built with proper storage and cubbies and closets and surface areas for you're unloading, it's going to become chaotic in there. And it's no one's fault. It's just that the architecture isn't supporting you. So please don't crab and nag and yell at the people you live with because the architecture isn't supporting your lifestyle, right? So through sensitive design, we can create a space, a good container for your family. And then the time spent interacting with your loved ones and the people you live with are on quality things, not pick up your shoes kind of thing. You don't have to be, you know what I mean? It's like, so architecture, certainly well designed, sensitive, thoughtful, conscious home design sows harmony in the relationships in the home, right? And if you unconscious architecture, it's going to invite friction and chaos. So please be extra sensitive and have extra compassion for each other if you're living in a home that's not perfectly designed, because it's going to inherently create friction zones, like you mentioned about the kids crabbing at each other in the bathroom, right? But so here it is, examples of giving relationship in the bathroom. By all means, if you have a window in the bathroom, put a plant in there or two, right? We already talked about benefits of plants. Not only are you cultivating a giving relationship, it's low maintenance too. I mean, once a week, take 3 steps from your sink to the plant with some water and and say hello plant and prune off a dead leaf maybe or something. And there it is. But it also has those physiological benefits. You've taken one step into making a dead utility space into an oasis or a garden. And so that feels a lot better, and windowsill is too small, then put a little shelf there and put a couple plants on it or hang it from the top. If you do not have a window in your bathroom, if you have an inside bathroom, then put in a full spectrum light bulb because there are plenty of plants that can do just fine with that kind of light. And it's not gonna run up the electric bill to keep that on, for half the day. So your plant can be, the benefit you get from the plant in there far outweighs the 30 cents it takes to illuminate the room. And so, um, taking that one step further, what about putting a fishbowl in your bathroom, with a beautiful goldfish, or one of the beta fish that has the long flowy fins, and then you come in and it's like there's life in there, it's a little spark of joy. Hi, fish. Get the little food on top of there, and then go about your business, and do what you do. And so this is very fun. It brings a little spark of joy into your day. If you choose, this is, everyone has to choose what's appropriate for them. But these are examples of giving relationships in a bathroom. Reciprocal relationships, we see this very common in master bathrooms with 2 sinks, the double bowl master. And so you can sit there and wash your face side by side with someone. If you have space and your lifestyle desires, then why not put a tub that's big enough for 2 people to soak in? It's very calming and relaxing. It's a nice connection. It can be very romantic, or just maybe not romantic, but it's just practical for efficiency's sake. What if you have a shower area with 2 heads, and so rather than having to take turns, you can both do it simultaneously. And it's not necessarily sexy time. This is just time to do your business, but in proximity with someone else. And studies show that kind of, even if you're not talking to each other, you're just there going through these things, that type of silent connection creates a sense of security and stability. Hey, we're together. I'm not alone in life. Yeah. And so these are, if you choose, these are examples of opportunities for reciprocal relationship in the bathroom. And receiving relationships, take an image of someone that inspires you or someone that cares about you, and get them up in the bathroom. So you're there brushing your teeth, and look, we all know how to brush our teeth. We do it on autopilot. We don't have to think about it. Now I'm scrubbing this molar. Now I'm scrubbing, it's like I'm already, while I'm brushing my teeth, I may be going over my to-do list, for the day. I'm already thinking, oh, remember that email I got yesterday? I got to respond to that. Here's what I'm going to say. We can multitask, right? Nothing wrong with doing that. What I'm suggesting is, of that moment, of that time that you're there, take 5 seconds to intentionally connect with that image and say, you know what? someone does want the best for me. I am being encouraged. I am loved. I am supported, and revitalize that feeling of support in yourself. How does that change how you stand on your own 2 feet, how you feel in your own body, the confidence that you show up into the world with? What ripple effects is that going to send out into life? And then what, like when you throw a pebble into a pond and the ripples go out, it hits the shores and it comes back. How is that going to set up some sort of positive feedback loop for you in your life, especially, over years of time, right? Like, what if these are just tiny little 2% shifts you can make? But what if they add up throughout your home to where every day you felt 8% more supported, or 8% more loved, or 8% less stress? How would that compound over time? It's like the butterfly effect. The mathematician wrote a paper called, he titled it, "Do the flapping of a butterfly's wings in Brazil eventually set off a tornado in Texas?" And what he proved, mathematically with this formula, is that, um, while it's true that not all small things turn into big things, all big things started as small things. Every big life-changing, world-changing event that happens had sensitive dependence on initial conditions. And so conscious home design is about being intelligent about the little initial conditions we set up in our life so that they can grow over time to become big things for us, positive things for us. Yes? So look, maybe it's too prominent to have a picture of grandma or a picture of Christ, of Jesus, in your bathroom, and that just feels a little bit too much. Why not take a quote? Take something, a spiritual quote that means something personal to you, or maybe something, a line that someone wrote in a letter to you, and then, and write that out and put that up there. It's very subtle, but you can just look at that and go over almost like an affirmation. That's a more subtle way to incorporate a receiving relationship, opportunity for that support and connection, and just a reminder, hey, I'm loved. Someone wants the best for me. And so I invite anyone to just do a self-assessment in their home. Anyone can do this, even if you're living in a rental. Go through your home and say, do I have opportunities in this room for all three kinds of relationship? What relationships are best supported here? Are there any gaps? If so, am I okay with that, or do I want to make a shift, and support myself a little better? Everyone needs to figure out for themselves where the low-hanging fruit, what's going to make them feel more supported or more enriched, and choose your own adventure. But now you have the tools to be able to assess that, consciously. Now that knowing is half the battle, right? You can put that to work for yourself. So that if there's one takeaway that I have for listeners, it's that one. It's the giving, receiving, reciprocal relationships, and see where your opportunities are in your home and in your life.
Love it, brother. Love it. Thank you so much for taking the time to, lay out do your work and everything that we've covered here. Give us that where do we find you? Where do we get the book? How do we work with you directly if somebody?
Thanks, Logan. So, yeah, my book, Conscious Home Design, you can order it through your local bookstore. They just tell them you want it by Talor Stewart Architect, and they can order it in for you. You can certainly get it online at Barnes and Noble or Amazon, or any online retailer. Um, you can also get it at my website, conscioushomdesign.com. I also have a workbook, which is, so the book you can read in about an hour. It's very accessible. It's not a lot of jargon in there. It's very easy to read. It's the big idea. Like I said, the rocks are in there. But translating those ideas and saying, what will that look like for me personally in my, world? I partnered with someone who has a dual master's degree in psychotherapy. This person works as a therapist, as a counselor for people, and social work. And read the book, and together we created a workbook full of exercises and worksheets to help people apply those concepts in their own situation, because the quality of the questions you ask uh, determine the quality of the results you're going to get. If you ask good questions, you get good answers and good outcomes. And so Conscious Home Design, the workbook was about asking people the questions that I know they need to ask, but they might not have thought of to ask themselves. And so, I worked with this person to really go deep and say, how can we pull out the very best of people? And so the workbook is only available on my website, not available anywhere else. And so I think I've got a bundle package right now, like an instant digital download of the book, the audio book, if you like to listen to books, and the workbook for like 47 bucks. So pretty a no brainer. Go ahead and do that. If you want a physical copy, it's a little bit more. I'll sign it and mail it to you, snail mail it, and you'll also get the digital copy instant download as well. So you don't have to wait for it to come in the mail. I work on projects all over the country, and so I've got projects coast to coast, and top to bottom. So if you want to do a private consultation with me, there's a contact me form. Just go ahead and fill that out, and be happy to. You can pick my brain. I can let you know what you're thinking, or if you do the workbook and you want my feedback, you can send me the results, and I'll let you know. I'll help you, navigate the path forward. So whether you just want a little consultation or you want to build a new home, definitely reach out to me. ConsciousHomeDesign.com. Thanks
Taylor.
for
Thank you
the little
so much, my
plug.
friend.
Yeah.
Yeah, shameless plug. Do it. You got to do it. Thank you, buddy.